Thank you very much, Ladina. Thank you to the organizers for having invited me here. I'm very delighted and honored. Let me start by briefly explaining about Save the Children. So, in fact, 2019 is a very special year for Save the Children, as our organization celebrates its 100 years anniversary. Save the Children was founded in 1919 by a very strong English lady called Eglantine Jepp to help children affected by World War I. 100 years later, Save the Children is one of the largest child rights organizations of the world, working in around 120 countries in the world. Save the Children Switzerland was founded in 2006 as an independent member of the Save the Children Association, and we implement projects in the area of child health, education, and protection in around 40 countries worldwide. I'm very pleased to be here today and to explain about our work in the area of inclusive education. Why inclusive education? Article 24 of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities says, state parties recognize the rights of persons with disabilities to education, with a view to realizing this right without discrimination and on the basis of equal opportunity. State parties shall ensure an inclusive education system at all levels and lifelong learning. But what does inclusive education really mean, and what is the role of international cooperation in promoting inclusive education? Let me read out a testimony from a colleague, an education manager of Save the Children in Bangladesh. When I traveled to Sylhet in northern Bangladesh, I visited Kanchuli Government Primary School and met Mrs. Shika Ahmed. She has been a multi-grade teacher for grade 2 and 3 and for many years, and invited me to her classroom. There were 28 children, some from the nearby town of Sylhet, others from poor families working in the tea gardens. Some fluent in Bangla, others still struggling because at home they speak Sylheti or another language. Surprisingly, children were not sitting in rows, but working in groups and pairs, doing a variety of activities. One group was even sitting on a mat on the floor, reading. Sika had learned about active teaching and the use of cooperative learning. I am happily surprised by the results. Since I stopped my constant lecturing and children having to repeat after me, all the children have become more alert and interested, and they speak out and share ideas. Sika understands that different children learn in different ways, so she varies her teaching activities. I do not just write on the blackboard, but I teach through games, songs, dance, poems, and acting. And because children enjoy it, they learn better. Later, I found out that this multi-grade class has a girl who is HIV positive and a boy with a hearing impairment. But I would not have known through my classroom observation, because all children were working together and nobody was left out. I like this testimony because it shows that true inclusion means that all children can fully participate and learn. So actually, inclusive education goes very much in line with what we are trying to promote if we want to promote quality education in general. Namely, that all children learn and that teachers are able to support learners according to their specific needs. We all know that every child has its own way of learning at its own speed, whether it's a child with a disability or not. A good teacher is one who can apply a variety of methods, who can individualize teaching, who puts the child and its learning needs at the center of teaching. That is the objective of all our education programs, whether they have a specific focus on inclusion or not. This means that education cannot be inclusive without being of quality, nor can it be of quality without being inclusive. Moreover, research has clearly shown that inclusive education, as opposed to segregated schooling, benefits all children, not just those with additional needs, and it is linked to better learning outcomes for all. This is probably familiar to you, but I still find it important to emphasize that just because schools are not intentionally excluding children with special needs, it does not mean their education is automatically inclusive. With integration, the focus is on access, but there is no consideration whether children are actually learning or not, or whether they are stigmatized at school. As we have seen before, inclusive education enables all children to learn and together with support for their individual needs. This, of course, also includes children from marginalized groups, children with difficult family backgrounds, children who might struggle with psychological challenges such as trauma, etc., etc. It is important to start with the understanding that a child perceived as different should not be considered a problem. The problem is actually the unflexibility of the education system to meet that child's needs. Coming back to Article 24 of the CRPD, we can say that an inclusive education system means it is the responsibility of governments to adapt their education systems to the child, and not the child's responsibility to adapt to the education system. Turning an often very rigid and static education system into one that is inclusive and flexible to the needs of all children is, of course, a very long process in which many barriers need to be addressed, and there is no standard model which works for all contexts. It would also be too simplistic to assume that only developing countries struggle with that. We have many challenges here in Western countries as well. We have heard it also in the introduction. But if we look at international cooperation and the role of donors, NGOs, and international organizations in promoting inclusive education, we can say international treaties like the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities are important policy frameworks which can be used by civil society and actors of international cooperation to advocate for improvements. This is a lot about raising the awareness of children, parents, communities, policymakers, and local and national authorities on inclusive principles and values. It often requires to change the policies, practices, and cultures in schools so that they can respond to the diversity of learners in their locality, while at the same time working at the level of societies at large. Actors of international cooperation can also support governments, local authorities, and schools to addressing barriers to access, participation, and learning very concretely. They can support the creation of inclusive learning environments, with a particular focus on building the capacities of teachers and the school management on inclusive education. Such inclusive education programs must build on research, lessons learned, and best practices, and pilot new methods to identify the most effective inclusion measures in every context. And lastly, like also Claire has mentioned, in order to achieve effective and lasting change, actors of international cooperation should build partnerships and promote mutual learning with local actors, other NGOs, DPOs, universities, etc., to share knowledge, lobby together, and to complement each other. I was also asked by the organizers to present an example of our work in inclusive education. And I will briefly talk about a project on inclusive education that Save the Children is running in Armenia currently. and we'll start with a short explanation of the context there. So in Armenia, less than 1/3 of the registered young children with disabilities attend any form of preschool education, while 2/3 of them do not have access even to rehabilitation services. 8 out of 10 children, so any children in rural villages, do not receive early childhood education. Armenia is currently undergoing an education systems reform from segregation to inclusion and has set a target that by 2022, all schools in Armenia should become inclusive for children with disabilities. However, there is a lack of awareness, capacities and resources to realize inclusive education, especially at the local level, who is responsible in running preschool education institutions. On national level, there is a lack of appropriate standards, procedures and tools for quality inclusive preschool education. So what is Safe to Children doing there? As Safe to Children, we acknowledge the crucial role that early education can play in providing every child a fair start in life. Thus, we push at starting at an early age when promoting inclusive education. So our project helps rural municipalities who have no prior kindergarten infrastructure to establish quality and inclusive kindergartens. For this purpose, we used empty classrooms in the regular public primary schools, and those classrooms were renovated and equipped with adequate furniture and materials. Kindergarten teachers and local authorities were trained on quality inclusive education, early childhood education. So you see again, like we always link quality and inclusiveness, especially in our teacher trainings. The project conducted various awareness-raising activities with children, parents, teachers, communities, local and national government. Parental groups were established for caregivers of children with disabilities, and those met for regular group sessions. Moreover, the coordination between health, education and social services was facilitated. This because it's often a big challenge for caregivers to know about the different support mechanisms that exist for children with disabilities and to approach them regularly one after the other. Moreover, on the other side, teachers, they have no exchange usually with therapeutic staff at rehabilitation centers, which then prevents them from addressing the needs of the child in an integrated and coordinated manner. Therefore, the project has piloted models in which the kindergartens, they had institutionalized linkages with the rehabilitation centers for children with disabilities, or even models where mobile rehabilitation service teams were brought to kindergartens so that children could meet with their therapists after kindergarten individually or in groups, and the therapists could thereby exchange much more easily with the kindergarten teachers. On policy level, Save the Children did support the government of Armenia to develop standards and tools for quality, inclusive preschool education. This was timely given the commitments that the government had made and the need for technical support in putting this into practice. So what were key lessons learned from this project? Firstly, in order to promote inclusive education, strong awareness-raising efforts are needed at all levels, really from local level to national and international level. Change in attitudes and behaviors takes time. We were lucky that this was a long-term project, so we had the opportunity to work for a total of 9 years in Armenia on this topic. And this, of course, enabled us to pilot innovative approaches, gather evidence, and thereby gain more credibility also for our advocacy level efforts. Then, very evident, but still not always reflected, that that parental support is key to overcome stigmatization, feelings of shame and helplessness. Parents were so happy really to have for the first time the opportunity to meet and exchange in those parental groups. They were originally planned as 1-hour sessions, but parents just stayed on for 2 hours, 3 hours, even 4 hours sometimes, because they were just so eager to exchange and have that opportunity. The fact that those sessions were also facilitated by the kindergarten teachers, of course, helped also to improve the interaction between the parents and the teachers. Then lastly, coordination between education, health and other services. It's key for addressing the needs of children with disabilities in an integrated manner. Innovative models of service integration, so for example in our project with the mobile rehabilitation services, visiting kindergartens, can provide a big relief to children, parents and professionals, and of course enhance results for children. Thank you very much for listening. I hope it was interesting for you to get this very small insight into our work in inclusive education. Unfortunately, I think there is no time for questions now, but I'll be happy to respond to any questions you might have, also during the break or in the speed dating sessions.
Ja, Valeria hat es schon